A young woman storms out of her boyfriend's apartment to blow off some steam, but she is never seen by her loved ones ever again. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Elizabeth Campbell. Viewer discretion is advised. Elizabeth Campbell was born on May 31st, 1967. She was the baby of the family, the youngest of 5 kids. Her dad was Tom Campbell, who had met Elizabeth's mom, Sam Soon, in Korea. Elizabeth's family would describe her as just being an incredibly beautiful young woman inside and out. She was the sweetest person you could ever possibly meet. People would say it was always really hard to ever be mad at her because she was always well-intentioned. Elizabeth was incredibly popular. She had a very large circle of friends, and none of those friends were ever involved in the wrong crowd. And so Elizabeth never fell into that. She never got into any kind of trouble. She got good grades in school. She was someone who respected everyone, especially her elders. Elizabeth was also a very talented artist, and she actually had won awards in her past for her artwork. Those paintings, some of them at least, are now still hung in the family home. It's just that home doesn't have Elizabeth. Now, Elizabeth, at the time of this case, is 20 years old, and she is dating a young man named Ricky Ray. Elizabeth was attending Central Texas College in Killeen, Texas. It was the evening of April 25th, 1988. Elizabeth was doing a part-time job at a 7-Eleven. And Elizabeth normally had her car, but this particular evening, her sister had borrowed her car. So when Elizabeth got off of work at 9 p.m. that night, this was a Monday night, Ricky would pick her up, her boyfriend. He then drove her to his house in Killeen, where they were, I guess, having a study group, and so she was there with all the friends. At around 10 p.m., Ricky and Elizabeth got into some kind of argument, just some sort of, normal boyfriend-girlfriend type of fight. She had called her parents to say, hey, can you pick me up? I don't have the car. But while she was on the phone with her parents, Ricky said, I can just take you home. That's fine. And so Elizabeth hangs up the phone with her parents. She then takes her backpack and walks out of the house. Ricky assumed she was just going to be waiting out there for him to take her home. But Ricky was also still kind of mad about this argument, and so he didn't walk out of the house right away. And apparently this would prompt Elizabeth to basically say, screw it, I'm walking. She lived 30 miles away. There was just no way she was going to be walking home on her own that night. Some people believe that somehow Elizabeth found a ride close by to Ricky's house and that they took her back to Central Texas College. That's just a rumor, but no one can corroborate this story, that potential story. At 10:48 p.m., Elizabeth was walking along Highway 190, which was nearby the college she attended. A student recognized her, and then at that point, the student offered to give her a ride. So by 11 p.m., she gets into the student's car, and he drops her off at the 7-Eleven. This is now approximately 17 miles from Elizabeth's home and 11 miles from Ricky's home. The store clerk at that 7-Eleven would later confirm that Elizabeth was in the 7-Eleven on her own. Nobody was with her. There weren't anyone waiting outside for her. That's when Elizabeth calls Ricky and says, all right, I'm scared. Can you come pick me up? Well, now Ricky is mad because she left before he could, take her home. He's mad because of the argument they had. And so he basically says, it's too late. It's too late at night. I'm not going to do all that. And so he doesn't pick her up. Elizabeth says, well, fine, I'll call my brother. I'll call someone else to come pick me up. Now, in order to call her brother, it would have been long distance. So she didn't want to use the 7-Eleven's phone to do that. So witnesses would report seeing her at a payphone just outside the 7-Eleven. But her brother never got a phone call. I believe later they would determine that she attempted to call her parents' house at that time of night from the payphone, but no one answered. According to the store clerk at the 7-Eleven, she saw Elizabeth kind of just on the phone and then saw Elizabeth sort of standing outside the 7-Eleven, apparently waiting. This is when, a short time after all of this, the 7-Eleven clerk notices Elizabeth getting into a vehicle. It was a white or silver vehicle with a maroon vinyl top. And the clerk said that when they left, it drove towards the direction of Killeen. And after that, none of her loved ones would ever hear from her ever again. Elizabeth vanished into the night. When Elizabeth never got home, when Elizabeth never returned back to Ricky's home, when Elizabeth didn't call any more of her family, by the following day, they were extremely worried, and so they reported her missing. However, as usual in stories like this, the police said, nah, she's an adult. She's allowed to leave and disappear on her own. She'll come back. Don't worry. Again, I never understand this mentality. I get that sometimes police forces are limited, resources are limited, but if all of these cases were taken seriously from the moment they were reported, I wonder how many more missing people they would find instead of, alive instead of dead. But police told the parents, you need to wait 72 hours before we'll do anything. Great, thanks. In that time frame, she could be murdered. But cool, thank you. 72 hours go by. Elizabeth still isn't home. She hasn't contacted anyone. Her parents call the police again and say, now can we report her missing? They say, okay, great, now we'll do it. But even still, the police were basically saying she likely just disappeared voluntarily. She got into a fight with her boyfriend, which they, heard that story after she was reported missing. She just stormed off. She wanted to blow off some steam. She'll be back. Again, there's no proof or anything to say that. They're just guessing this. But it got to a point where everyone's beginning to realize, okay, she hasn't touched her bank accounts. She hasn't used her social security number. She hasn't been, confirmed seen by any friends or family at that point. There was a belief that she had been killed. If not, she had been kidnapped and was being held hostage somewhere. Her parents, Tom and Samsoon, would get out there basically on their own. They're out there on the streets. They're passing out flyers. They're asking people if they've seen anything or heard anything. They're interviewing people, as police are doing that as well at this point. But her parents were going on the news showing photos of Elizabeth. Please, if you've seen her, please let us know. And after passing out literally like thousands upon thousands of missing persons flyers, they finally started to get some tips from people. There was a store clerk from Waco, Texas. This man was named Roger Anion. He was it was a convenience store clerk. Roughly 48 miles away from where Elizabeth disappeared, this clerk saw Elizabeth at this establishment. He said a car drove up to the gas tank, to fill up their car with gas, and in the car was what he described as an Asian man, and then there was a young Asian woman. The man gets out of the car, opens the passenger side door, and basically pulls the young woman out of the car. And he's essentially grabbing her by the wrist and pulling her around everywhere he goes. It did not look like some sort of, this did not look like they were in a relationship. It didn't look like they were related. It looks like this was just a man who was forcibly moving this young woman around. The man and the woman go into the convenience store. They're there for a few minutes. The man goes up to the store clerk, takes out a wad of cash, slips out a 20, puts it on the counter. The clerk, I guess this is for paying for gas, and the clerk says, anything else I can get you? And the guy just says, no. And then they walk out. The young woman at one point kind of dropped her head as if she was being scolded and wasn't allowed to look at the store clerk, and so then was basically not forcibly dragged out, but the man had her just above the wrist and just kind of pulled her like she was on a leash or something. So when her parents pass out flyers, the store clerk ends up getting one, and then he tells the parents what he saw, which is then relayed to the police. Then there was a store clerk named Michelle Christensen. She worked at a convenience store in Copperas Cove. I'm so sorry. This is about 2 miles from where Elizabeth was last seen. The store clerk says that she saw Elizabeth and a tall Asian man at the convenience store together. This was about 2 weeks after Elizabeth disappeared. They came in to get, I guess, some ice cream. The man was holding the young woman who looked like Elizabeth by the wrist, or just above the wrist. And it looked like Elizabeth wasn't allowed to talk, because when the clerk tried to talk to her, she again put her head down, and, it looked again like this man had her on a leash and that she wasn't allowed to say anything. But then they leave, and they are leaving in a car similar to the same car that the other store clerk had seen. So once the parents heard this story, they're like, oh my God, this is just like the other story, way far away. And this has not been put out on the news at this point yet. So these two stories are now identical, and there's no way they made it up, because, again, these had not been on the news. So they were very confident that Elizabeth at this point is alive out there somewhere. However, Police, when they heard the story, were like, yeah, but was it Elizabeth, though? They were, like, convinced it wasn't her. Even though these clerks were shown photos of Elizabeth, and they both said, yeah, that is her. And they remembered her, even after it had been weeks, because it was such a bizarre situation with this man, lugging her around like luggage. Then, 2 months after she disappears, another person claims they saw Elizabeth. This time it was not a store clerk, it was a customer. This time it was in Garland, Texas, approximately 150 miles away from where Elizabeth was from. A woman named Virgie Johnson, she had gotten gas, then she realized she left her card in the store, so she walks back into the store, but as she's walking back into it, she sees a young Asian woman walking out. They actually bumped into each other. This is a recreation I'm showing you. They bumped into each other, and, Virgie said, oh my God, I'm so sorry. But the young woman had her head down and was like, she couldn't say anything. The woman looks down and she sees that the young woman's walking towards a car, very similar to what was described in the other two stories, being driven by an Asian man. It looks like to this woman, to Virgie, that this young woman was not allowed to say anything. It looked like she was now on an invisible leash, as she called it. Like she made a beeline back to that car without saying anything to anyone. She looked like she was scared, like she was nervous or terrified. Again, you now have a third story that lines up with the other two. And once Virgie saw the photos being circulated, because again, this is a very bizarre scenario, you're going to remember this kind of thing, she goes forward to say, I've seen her too. So at this point, everyone's starting to believe that Elizabeth is still alive. She is being held against her will. She was kidnapped. She was abducted. The description of the man that these witnesses saw, and this is a composite drawing I'm showing you, did not match anyone that anyone knew in Elizabeth's life. It did not look like her boyfriend. It did not look like any, friends of hers. It didn't look like any classmates of hers, anyone in her family. No one recognized this man. No one in terms of the people in Elizabeth's life. And so now the theory is that Elizabeth was kidnapped by someone in the possibly sex trafficking ring. That Elizabeth is now being forced to do sex work. And that the man that was seen with Elizabeth was her pimp and her possibly abductor. The police told Elizabeth's parents that there is this underworld pipeline. And it's basically, he stated that it's provided Asian prostitutes from Killeen to Dallas and Houston. There is a sociologist named Dr. Lois Lee, who I guess was a founder of something called Children of the Night, which is something that rescues young people from prostitution rings. Well, she said that basically, looking into this case, that Elizabeth is one of these people. She is being held against her will to do sex work, to make money for this sex trafficking ring. She may have been trafficked during all of this. These are scenarios in which they'll take nude photos of their prostitutes and they'll distribute and sell those photos as well. And that the pimp, if with Elizabeth, would never let her out of his sight. And so that one story in Garland where the customer saw her walk, on her own, not being held by the wrist, they wonder if that was really Elizabeth, because it seemed odd that in this situation, he wouldn't have her by the wrist, that he let her just go on her own. But at the same time, the sociologist says, you do see that from time to time where there is this, what they call an invisible leash put on someone, where the abducted person now has so much fear in them that they know not to walk away, not to call for help, because they believe that they will be punished by their abductor or this pimp or whoever he may be. At that point, though, there have really been no more sightings of Elizabeth Campbell. Never, not since. The car that she had been seen getting into was described as a white or silver vehicle with a maroon vinyl roof. It could have potentially been a Pontiac or a GMC. The colors, they said, were unique for that time period. The car was typically headed towards Killeen every time it was seen. The unidentified Asian man that she was with is described as being about 5'7", 160 pounds. He has acne scars on his face and seems to have plucked his eyebrows. In both sightings, he was wearing a silver martial arts medallion on a gold chain. At the time, he was between the ages of 25 and 30. It's not known at this point if he had anything to do with Elizabeth's actual abduction or if she was abducted by somebody else, and then he just became her assigned pimp. Or she isn't involved in any sex trafficking. She was abducted, and this abductor kept her around for a while and then finally did something to her to end her life. It's also a possibility. It's also potential that the young Asian woman that was seen with this man on these 3 occasions wasn't Elizabeth. Although that seems to be it does seem to be believed that it truly was her, just based on the multiple different sightings describing almost the exact scenario. That when shown photos, they said, yeah, that's definitely her. So, but again, it could be possible that it wasn't her. Her boyfriend, by the way, Ricky, completely ruled out. They know he had nothing to do with this because they had that study group that night, and all of the students confirmed he was there the entire time. He never left the house. About a week after Elizabeth's disappearance, I guess a hospital worker in Lampasas got a strange call from a man who asked if an ambulance carrying Elizabeth's body had arrived at the hospital yet. But when they tracked that tip, they didn't find anything out. There was no young woman matching Elizabeth's description that had gone to that hospital or any hospital that night or in the nights afterwards. And now at the time of this case, Elizabeth's disappearance is still unsolved. Nobody knows where she is. There have been no more confirmed sightings of her. On May 6, 1992, 4 years after Elizabeth's disappearance, her purse was found by deputies who were cleaning out the evidence room at the Crockett County Sheriff's Office in Ozona, Texas, about 230 miles away from where Elizabeth was ever seen. That purse had, I guess, been found at a gas station off Interstate 10 in Ozona. The purse was still in good condition and had apparently not been out in the elements for too long. It did contain Elizabeth's driver's license, social security card, her military identification card, credit cards, checkbooks, her makeup, hairbrush, and keys were missing, however. So the keys were missing. And so they alerted the authorities, when the purse was found. We have her purse, just so you know. I don't believe any forensic evidence, however, was found with it. There have been speculations that a serial killer actually abducted Elizabeth and killed her, buried her somewhere in some, vast field or forest somewhere. Her family has basically sold almost everything they have to continue funding to searching for her. Her mom has this really big, beautiful kind of memorial in their home with just a bunch of photos of Elizabeth. And she is still holding out hope that Elizabeth will one day come home. And, there is no proof of death. There's also no proof of life. And so you have to kind of cling on to that hope that she might still be out there. And there's a good chance she might be. But if she was a part of the sex trafficking ring or prostitution ring and, her abductors found out that now her story's all over the place, they may have killed her or trafficked her somewhere, maybe out of the country. It's, there's so many possibilities that could have happened. I believe they've talked to that one student, by the way, who saw Elizabeth and picked her up and dropped her off at the 7-Eleven. And I think they basically have stated that he had nothing to do with this either. He had an alibi. There is currently a $10,000 reward for anyone who can help bring Elizabeth home or provide information as to where she is or what happened to her, and potentially bring in her abductor / potential killer to justice. It's a difficult case to solve because there really is no evidence here. They have the purse, but that's about it. She is out there somewhere. Elizabeth has got to be out there somewhere. She may be deceased, but she may also be alive. It's really 50-50 at this point. But with it being now decades later and not being seen, there really is that chance that someone ended her life. But someone has to know what happened. It's been decades, so you can come forward now. It's way past that time to come forward, so please do it. If you're afraid of someone, report your information anonymously. Just help her family get her home in whatever capacity that may be, and help her get justice if justice is something that needs to be done, which in all likelihood it is. If you have any information on the whereabouts or what happened to Elizabeth Campbell, please call 254-547-8222. You can leave an anonymous tip at Crime Stoppers at 254-526-8477. And it is the Crime Stoppers line that will help you get a reward, for providing the information. So please, if you have the information, if you saw something, if you heard something, please say something, because Elizabeth Campbell and her family deserve to bring her home. And also they need to get the justice for Elizabeth, the justice that she very rightfully deserves. But That is it for this case. True crime, Aruni, Dooney, Dingleberry Dongs. I hope you found it interesting. As usual, please subscribe to the channel. Hello, my name is Mike. If you're new here, I tell true crime stories several times a week. So please subscribe, give this video a like, leave a comment because that helps more people see it. Please watch the videos all the way to the very end. That also helps a lot. Share the videos if you want to. I also tell short form true crime stories over on TikTok. The link to my TikTok is in the link tree, which is in the description of this video below. I do post compilation videos, though, of all my previous TikTok videos from 1 month at the beginning of the following month. Those are usually like several hours long. But yes, follow that page if you want to. Also in the link tree below, you'll find my case list. It's over 7,000 names now. If you scroll through it and you don't see a name on there that you want me to cover, just send me a quick email. My email is listed in the description below as well. Just the name of the case, where it happened, and when it happened, and I'll add it to the list. I pick my cases typically at random. However, if you are a loved one of a missing person or a murdered person who has not gotten justice yet, and you would like me to tell their story, whether it be here on YouTube or on TikTok, let me know in that email that you are a loved one so I can make that a top priority. But that is it for this video, True Crime Maroonies. So until the next case, ta-ta for now.